Hi, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at your analysis in Snap and we're going to be focusing on producing charts. This follows on from a recent webinar which was based around tables in Snap. If you weren't able to catch that one, I would certainly advise searching out on our support hub, as really a chart is just a table in disguise. Before we begin, let's have a quick look at what analysis really means. Often the idea of analysis just involves throwing a spreadsheet of data at someone, but is this really analysis? Numbers in a spreadsheet won't necessarily give you the whole picture, as questions might be rooted out for some respondents, along with different answers perhaps being masked out based on their previous answers. There's a real danger that in the wrong hands, an innocent Excel spreadsheet of data could be misinterpreted, and then that data could be used to guide the planning of future projects or business decisions. Analysis is all about drawing out the key information and presenting it in a way that is clear and to the point. So what can we do to help? In short, we can tabularize and chart this data, pointing people to the key information. We can use tables and charts to compare results from different areas or different demographics, ordering the data to make it easier to read, and also filtering in or out key areas of focus. With Snap, we can add scoring systems to our questions, which is particularly useful if you have rating type questions. This allows us to display a mean or average score across different question sets and sectors. As well as providing useful information to your colleagues and clients, producing your analysis in Snap also has the key benefit of your data always being up to date. If instead you're exporting your data and producing your tables and charts outside of Snap, these tables and charts only contain the data that was available at that time of the export. In Snap, you can build your tables and charts before your project has even gone live, and they will then update as and when your data trickles in. Okay, let's head into the software to make a start. I'm using a survey which you may well be familiar with if you've joined us for any of our recent webinars. It's about attendees at a conference and contains a range of different question types. It has 160 people that have responded, so if I was to export this out to Excel, I'd simply end up with 160 rows of data. But today we're going to pick out a few of the questions and look at building some charts. If I run a quick preview so we can see the sorts of questions that we're going to be using today. We have a number of single response questions, and you can see we've got routing, so different questions will pop up depending on how we respond. We have a number of multiple response questions. In fact, this one is a map control where we're clicking on particular images, as well as a single response map control at the bottom. Most surveys tend to have some sort of satisfaction type question. And then we have some further multiple response questions where we can choose as many options as we like. And then towards the end, we have some comment questions and another satisfaction question. And then at the very end, we have a number of sort of demographic type questions. So your age, but also which venue did you attend today? And there's another map control at the end. So a good range of question types that we'll be making use of today. But if we pop back into the desktop software, we can close down the questionnaire design window as we don't need that one for today, but it might be useful to keep the variables window open just to remind us what the different types of questions were that we're looking at today. Having said that, just to save some space during this webinar, I am going to close this window down and we're going to open up the charts icon at the top. So we've got the tables, charts, lists and clouds, but today we're looking at charts. With charts, we have a number of different chart styles available, and they're available in our drop-down menu. And if I was to click on this select button, we get a bit more of an idea of what the different types of charts are going to look like. Now, just to confirm, these are just thumbnail images to give you an indication of what the chart's going to look like. So the images don't actually contain your data. But you can see we've got a good range of different types of charts, and towards the bottom, there's some different color schemes. So some sort of red to amber color schemes. And then we've also got some Excel color schemes at the bottom. But I'm just going to start off with a bar counts. So I'll leave it on that one and click OK. In terms of stating which questions I want to analyse, we have the analysis and then below that the break. And for those of you who are perhaps more used to using Excel, the analysis and the break really just refers to your X and Y axes. I'm just going to quickly pop back into my PowerPoint. As I said, if you're more familiar with Excel, you're most likely used to the terms X and Y, with X going across and Y going down. In Snap, it's exactly the same principle, but we call it analysis and break. And when you're trying to remember which is which, just think of your car breaking down. You can see in the middle I've got a simple table with age being the analysis going across, and then the gender being the break, which is giving me the columns of data going down the page. But as I said, really a chart is just a table in disguise, so the equivalent chart is the one on the right hand side. Obviously we no longer have rows and columns, we have, in my example here, bars. But if I head back into the software, I'm going to start off with question 2 in my analysis. I'm just going to type in Q2. We'll leave everything else as it is and we'll just click apply. So a nice simple chart, just to highlight the fact that if I was to resize my chart, you can see everything's moving around. I can click on things and drag them into different locations. I can double click on them and then pop them back to where they were to begin with. You can see at the moment we have the numerical values at the side, so it's quite hard to tell what the actual values are. We can clearly see that the blue bar is 10 and the green bar is somewhere between 20 and 25. So it may be that we want to drop down the menu and choose the one which says labelled. And that will simply add labels to the top of the bars. But with my legend at the side, even though we've only got 4 options, I'm still having to look at my colours and then go across and see what they all belong to. So a quick easy fix would be to transpose that, and really transposing a table or chart just means swapping the columns and rows. As I said, obviously we don't have columns and rows in a chart, but what that will do is just change the layout, and my legend has now attached itself to the different bars. We might decide that actually rather than looking at counts, we want to look at percentages. So again, I'll go with bar percent and we'll go with the labelled one. But this is where we just need to bear in mind that, as I said, this is just a table in disguise. My table is calculating counts. My disguise is making it look like a percent. So as I click apply, that's going to look like 22%. Really, it's 22 people with a percent symbol at the end. So just need to make sure that if we're calculating percents, we tell the table underneath to calculate percents. With it being a table in disguise, sometimes it's useful to actually see that table in the first place. So if I drop down my menu and change it to table, then it might be easier to look at the data there. And here it's a lot easier to see what that transpose is actually doing. So it's going down the page, it's going across the page. So just the analysis and the break are just switching positions. But I'm going to turn it back into a chart. We might want to add an additional question. So I'm going to pop question 15 into the break, which is the age question. And if we apply that one. Now, my example has an age question with 6 different categories. So you can see it's quite a busy looking chart now. So one thing we might want to do is make use of a derived variable, which might simplify the analysis here. So I've got a derived variable I've created previously called age. So I'm going to apply that one and then we'll look at that derived variable in just a second. But if I click apply, you can see my derived variable called age is broken into 3 different categories rather than 6 categories. But just to confirm, if I bring up my derived variable, so back into the variables window, and I've got my age derived variable, and here we're saying the data from question 15, options 1 and 2 will go into this category, options 3 and 4 into that category, and options 5 and 6 into my final category of 56. So just a way of simplifying all the analysis. Ultimately, the data's all there, it's just recategorized. At the moment, I've got my age categories down the side, and each of the sort of bar headers are how often people visit. If I was to take the transpose off and apply that one, you can now see we're looking at the main categories are the age groups, and then within there we've got how often they all visit. What we do need to bear in mind though is that our percentages are based on the categories within Q2. So it's actually the blue bar, the once a year, the blue bar, the blue bar, and the blue bar, which is adding up to 100%. Likewise, the green, and the green, which is adding up to 100%. So in this instance, I've got my age categories across the bottom. Realistically, if I want the 16 to 35-year-olds in this area, I'd want those 4 bars to add up to 100%. So we really want the break percent. So each of the options within age are now going to add up to 100%. So now it's the first 4 bars add up, and then the next 4 and the final 4. If I was to transpose it again, we've got that same situation where it's actually all of the blues which are adding up. So again, just need to work out what percentage calculation are we looking for. So in terms of percentages, they are all correct, whether it's the analysis percents or the break percents. What we just need to bear in mind is which percentage calculation we're looking for, and more importantly, once we decided which calculation we're looking for, how's it best to display that information. And as I said, sometimes when you're looking at these charts in disguise, it can be quite hard to look at the data and work out whether what you're looking at is the actual correct calculation. So we can always just pop it back to a table, and then it might be easier to see that, yeah, my columns of data are adding up to 100%. But I'm going to pop that back to a chart and click OK, and then we will save. So close that one down, and then I'm going to look to introduce one of our bigger tables, or one of our bigger questions. So we're going to look at question 7. This question is, which facilities did you use? Again, we'll stick with the bar percents labelled initially. So again, we want to make sure we're calculating percentages. As before, it's all quite colourful, which is nice, but at the same time, we have to look at the legend on the left-hand side or the right-hand side to work out which bar means which. So as before, quick easy fix is the transpose button. And not too bad today because I've got about 9 categories, but ultimately you might have longer words, more categories. You're going to get situations where the wording is going to start to overlap each other. We have got options to make the wording sort of go diagonal or go down the page. It's going to make it harder to read, to be honest. So rather than trying to change the labeling, it might just be easier to choose a slightly different questions or chart style. So this is a bar percent labeled. We've got some horizontal ones down the bottom, all with the same name, just with the word horizontal at the beginning. So rather than bar percent labeled, we will go with horizontal bar percent labeled. Just note that this one had the word transpose at the end. So these long-winded names, they're really there to tell you what to do underneath. So it says percent, I've got percent ticked. It says transposed, I've got transposed ticked. Realistically, with a chart like this, we'd want to probably sort it top to bottom. So we've got order by. So we could do it alphabetically, or today I'm going to do that by base, so by the actual data. Rather than looking at all the data, we might want to focus on the top performing areas. So we have, rather than all, I'm going to choose the top columns. And I'm going to go with the top 5, but just note that I do actually have a joint top 5, so the reception desk and the breakout rooms are both on 75. So when I click apply, I'm actually going to end up with effectively a top 6. And also just pointing out that although this is the options at the moment on display, if we were to look at the same data tomorrow when perhaps we've got a little bit more data, it may well be that the juice bar is no longer in the top 5 and we've got something else in its place. With any of our tables and charts or reports, we can filter our data. So if I was to filter on question 1, and question 1 is, have you visited before, yes or no? So if I say yes, so have I attended, this is now the top 5. If I was to change that to no, so Q1 equals 2, we've now got slightly different options. Again, I'll click OK and just save that one. We're next going to turn our attention to some satisfaction type questions. So in my example today, I have question 5A, B, C and D. So easier just to say Q5A tilde Q5D. Tilde, just to remind you, is just the same as me saying the word 2. So for this one, I'm going to go with another horizontal one, but this time a stacked bar. So horizontal stacked bar percent transpose. So as before, making use of the wording at the top, telling me to transpose it, telling me to tick percentages. And if I apply that one, now the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that some of these bars don't quite line up. So the middle 2 do line up. The first one is slightly shorter and the venue is slightly shorter again. So we've got a little bit of rounding up and down going on here. So it might be that the bottom one perhaps adds up to 99%. Maybe the top one's 100% and maybe the other middle ones are maybe 101. So to overcome that, we can go to cells. And for the decimal places, we can just calculate that to 1 decimal place. So if I apply that one. Now, just to confirm, the table in the background is calculating to 1 decimal place. The report or the chart style is not actually displaying that decimal place. The reason being is that ultimately it would end up looking a bit messy. There's not to say you can't turn on the decimal places. I can double click on my figures and we've got some settings in here where we can set the decimal places, but realistically, you probably don't want to actually display them. With a chart style like this, going sort of very good to very poor, it's quite popular to add sort of a colour scheme to that, perhaps a red, amber, green sort of traffic light scoring system. So again, we could double click on these colours and manually change them one at a time. But if we drop down the style menu, towards the bottom, or towards the top in fact, we've got some different colour schemes. We've got a 3 point, 4 point, 5 and 7. And we've also got green to red, because some of your charts might go positive to negative, other charts might go negative to positive. Now ours is a 5-point scale and we're going green to red, good to bad, it's stacked and it's got labelled. So again, just trying to match it all up and apply that one. So you can see we're starting to make the charts a little bit clearer to see what's good, what's bad, and what's sitting in the middle. We could take it a step further and convert this to a 3-point scale. So rather than very good to very poor, we could have positive, neutral, and negative. So I've got some I prepared already, some derived variables. So again, I'm just going to show you those before we apply them. So if I go into my variables window, so this was question 5, A, B, C, and D. So speakers, workshop, etc., etc. And you can see down the bottom, I've got some derived variables. So if I double click on those, so as before, it's taking its data from the original question, Q5A. The very good and very poor has gone into a category of positive, the okay sitting in the middle gone to neutral, and the 2 negative options gone through to a negative option. Exactly the same for V5B, obviously this time looking at a different question, but the same 1, 2 for positive and 4 and 5 for negative. But I'll close those 2 down and bring my chart back up. So again, rather than looking at Q5A to Q5D, we will look at V5A to V5D. Now, do just need to bear in mind we had a 5-point colour scheme on, so it's just taken the first 2 or first 3. That's not really going to work. So instead of a 5-point colour scheme, I'm just going to swap that for a 3-point. Still looking at green to red. So when we're starting to think about reporting, we're trying to draw out the important information and get rid of all that background noise. On that note, we could look to add a scoring system to give an average score across our different questions. We're going to stick with the question 5A to 5D, so the very good to very poor. And if I close these ones down, and we're initially going to make use of a weight. These weights are all built into our standard templates in Snap, so as soon as you open up a survey in Snap, you should have access to these. Equally, you can create them from scratch if you prefer, or edit them and make your own ones. But initially, I'm going to go into score 5 to 1. And in my example, answer number 1, which is very good, is going to be worth 5 points. Answer number 2, which is good, is worth 4 points, all the way down to answer 5, which is very poor, and that's worth 1 point. Worth noting that if your scale was reversed, so going negative to positive, you wouldn't necessarily need to use a weight, as Snap's automatically going to score the first answer as 1 and the last answer as 5, or obviously however many answers you have. That does, however, mean that if you had a questionnaire which had a don't know or not applicable option, so perhaps number 6, that would automatically be scored 6 points. So if that was the case, you'd want to make use of score 1 to 5 just to make sure that the 6th answer is excluded from your calculations. But as I said, today we're going to make use of score 1 to 5, so I'll just copy that text, and if I open up a new chart, so we're going to stick with question 5, A, B, C, and D. For this one, I'm going to choose a horizontal bar chart, and we're going to go with accounts labeled transposed. But this time we're not making use of counts or percents. We want to work out an average or a mean score. So we've got some means down here. It doesn't matter which one we're going to go for, because as we do that, the options on the right hand side are changing, but we're just making use of the means anyway. But our average score is going to be based on that scoring system, that weight that we just looked at, so score 5 to 1. And I'm going to compare my results against question 1, which was, have you visited before? So click apply. As you can see at the moment, I've got my yes and no, my no down the right hand side, so I've forgotten to transpose it. So we'll transpose it. So now we can see the different scores. Now at the moment it looks like they've all got the score 4 or the score of 3. But going back to our cells, if you remember, we can calculate decimal places. So I'm going to put 2 decimal places on there. So we can now see we've got different scores. Again, it does look like they're all the same score, and that's because we want to turn on our decimal places on the actual chart itself. So if I double click on number 4, just being careful, I don't just want to change the blue bar for the speakers. I want to change all of the yeses and all of the no's. So I'm going to hold down my control key. So I've got the data point label defaults selected for both the yes and the no's. If I go into value format, and rather than 0 decimal places, we'll turn those on to 2. So now we can much clearer see the different scores. So that was looking at the different scores broken down by the yeses and nos for those who have attended before or not. We might decide that actually we want to look at the scores for everyone. So if I was to remove the Q1 and try and click apply, Snap's going to be a little bit upset because it's not able to work out average scores unless we have something in the break. So to overcome that, if I just move that one out of the way and go into our variables window, there's a variable in there which again is built into all our templates called total. So if I just open that one up again, and this is a variable which everybody is attached to. So you can see it's got all 160 people attached to, and it really doesn't care whether someone is male or female, old or young, happy or sad. Just as long as they've clicked the link and that you've got their data, they're going to be assigned to this variable. So as I said, in my case, all 160 people. So I'm going to make use of that variable called total, and we're going to pop that into the break. So now we can see the total score for everyone across the 4 different questions. Again, we might want to sort this one and this by the means. So the mean score is just a different way of presenting your data. It's getting rid of that background noise and just displaying the overall score or the average score on a scale of 1 to 5. Another function we can perform using a weight is to work out the percentage of people who were positive. So I'm just going to close this one down and save it. Again, this is all about focusing on what you need to focus on and not worrying about the people who were negative or sitting on the fence in the middle. So just the people who were happy. Again, if I open up my weights, this time we're going to look at the one called first 2 of 5. So if I open up that one. So if you remember, mine's a 5-point scale with the first 2 options being the positive options. So here we're saying the answers 1 and 2, the 2 positive answers, have 100% of power. Answers 3 to 5, so the neutral, and the 2 negatives are going to have 0% of power. So it's not ignoring those last 3 answers, it's just not giving them any impact. And you can see there's a similar weight there called first 1 of 3. So in my case today, I've got a 5-point scale. You might have a question which is, did you think it was good, okay, or bad? We've also supplied some weights which are reversed, so effectively looking at the last 2 of 5 or the last 1 of 3. So today, of course, I'm focusing on the people who are going to be positive, so the percentage of people that were positive, giving power to the very good and good. You can do exactly the same, but this time potentially looking at people who were negative, so giving the power this time to the poor and very poor. But as I said, I'm going to focus on the percentage of people who are positive, so making use of first 2 of 5. So again, I'll copy that text and open up a brand new chart. We'll stick with questions 5A to 5D. And for my chart style today, I'm going to choose another horizontal one, but one we've used before, which is why it's at the top. So bar percent label transpose. So remembering to transpose it this time. We will look at the average again, and this time making use of that weight we just looked at. So 2 of 5. And remembering that we do need something in the break, so we are focusing on all 160 people. Click apply. Again, I'll quickly sort that one top to bottom based on the mean score. So again, this is all about removing that data that's getting in the way and detracting from the key focus. And in fact, if I just close that window down and open up a chart that we began with. So if we compare the first chart we looked at in this little section, where we've got more information, admittedly, we've got all the ins and outs of all the information, but is it information that's getting in the way? So yes, we can see the percentage of people who thought it was poor, very poor and okay, but ultimately we might well just be focusing on the people who were positive, so the first two options. It's not to say that you shouldn't make use of the data on the left or the chart on the left, it's just deciding whether that information is the information that you want your readers to focus on. If it's only the positives, remove all that background noise. And just to reiterate, the different chart styles have no effect on the actual data itself. It's more just what that chart's going to look like. And remember, the often strange names are there to tell you what to tick underneath. So if it says percents, tick percents. If it says transpose, it's been designed to work with a chart which has been transposed. One final chart to show you. If you're plotting data over a period of time, then often a line chart would be a good way of displaying that data. So for this one, we're going to look at question 5A and also question 5B. And for the chart style, I will go with line chart. And in the background of every survey, Snap will be tracking the date that the survey took place, or the date that each questionnaire was completed. So if I go into my variables window, we have a variable in there called id.date, which is the date the survey took place. In fact, it's actually the date that the survey link got clicked. If you want the date that the survey was submitted, it would be id.enddate. But today, I'm going to make use of just the id.date. Now, from this information, I've created a couple of derived variables. One is called month, so this is one I've prepared already. And this one is taking the data from id.date, but focusing on just the month element. So id.date month 1 is January, 2 is February, all the way down to number 12 for December. Not going to make use of that one today though, but also just worth making note that this is merely looking at the month. So if you have got years of data in here, you probably wanted to specify not just what month it was, but what year it belongs to instead. And that's kind of what I've done with my next example. I've got a derived variable called quarter. So here we're still looking at id.date, still looking at month, but this time 1, 2 and 3. So that's going to be January, so quarter 1, but this time also picking out the year element. So I've got 4 for 2025. Obviously looking at the different quarters, and then 4 for 2026, again looking at those same different quarters. So if we add this derived variable into our chart, and as before, we're going to look at the percentage of people who were positive. So just making use of that weight called first 2 of 5. Looking at the average, so the means. And here we can see a nice display because visually we can see the peaks and troughs across the various quarters of how we're doing, whether we're doing good or bad. Okay, just to finish off, we're going to pop into Snap Online to have a look at how your charts might be accessed by colleagues, clients, or just yourself. Before I do log into Snap Online though, I did just want to pop into the saved tables and charts that we've been producing throughout today. Now these will automatically be available to view in Snap Online. If there are some charts or tables that you don't want to be visible, we can simply specify which ones won't be visible using the quick set availability. So you can see here, I've already hidden the table called T5. I might also get rid of the T7 ordered just by simply clicking no. So we should have access to AM1 through to AM5, as well as a couple of tables as well. There is additional functionality that allows you to make certain charts, tables, and reports available to different people depending upon their access level, but that's for another day. Before we head into Snap Online, I'm just going to synchronize all the changes we've made today. And then if I log into my training account, so you can see I've got my survey waiting for me, and it already has the 4 standard reports built into Snap, as well as the saved tables and charts that we've just been looking at. But if we go straight into the Analyze tab, so as I said, got access to those 4 default summary reports, but more importantly, going down to tables and charts, and we have the different charts that we were looking at earlier. As I said, we hid a couple of those tables, so they're not visible. We just got the AM1 to AM5, as well as just a couple of those other tables. Just like in desktop, as I click on one, it will update with the very latest information. So if we were to view this chart this very second, we're going to get the data. If we refresh it 5 minutes later, we're going to get potentially updated data. As before, we can add some filters to it. So I've got filters and context. Today I'm going to filter on the age question. So we can say age equals 1. If you remember, that's the derived variable. So if I click OK and apply, you can see the original filters we were looking at earlier are still valid. So we've got attended before equals no. I can go into the modify and edit those as well. So if I change that to equals yes and apply that one. If there are filters that I want to use on a regular basis, or perhaps these tables, charts, or reports are going to be used by colleagues or clients to view, I can set up what's known as a predefined filter. And that's going to allow me just to tick a box rather than sort of typing in these expressions. So I'm just going to remove that original age filter. And this time I will click on the plus. And within here, I can now just simply drop down a menu, select which questions I want to filter on. So I'm going to do it on venue. And then, as I said, just simply a case of ticking Cardiff rather than needing to say venue equals 3, etc. Might want to add an additional filter, perhaps the date of interview. So if I take all the data from the beginning of the year, so January the 1st, through to perhaps today's date, and then click apply. If I quickly pop back to desktop, these predefined filters are set up within the Analyze window. So we've got define external filter or context. The word define external filter is relating to the fact that these filters are for use in Snap Online rather than in Snap Desktop. So you can see the 3 that I had there already, the venue, the date, and the age. If I also wanted to add in perhaps question 1, so have you visited before? We've now got that option available. If I synchronize, pop back into Snap Online, and if I just refresh the screen, go back into tables and charts and filters and context, we can now see the extra option is available. You can, of course, build your own charts from scratch within Snap Online just by clicking back on the charts and this time clicking New Analysis. And for this one, I'm going to look at a chart and we'll go with a pie chart. Go with pie chart labeled inside. If I click on the analysis, we've got the analysis and breaks. So I'm going to do question 1. All the other options that we were playing with are available under more. So remembering a pie chart is %, so need to analyze percentages. If I click apply, it's generally good practice to sort pie charts biggest segment through to smallest. So if I go back into modify, and we can again sort that one top to bottom, and we'll give it a title of visited before. And when we save this one, we can give it a name. So I'm going to call it C because it's a chart and it's based on question 1. So I'll just call it C1. And then that is available to click on as and when I wish. And equally, if you were to view it in desktop, it will be available. Again, there is a lot more we can do in Snap Online with regards to sharing these charts along with any tables and reports. More information is available on our support hub about this, as well as some of our previous webinars, which are also accessible via that support hub. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little introduction to charting your data within Snap XMP. You've seen that it's nice and easy to build simple charts, plotting questions together, and also filtering your data as required. And we've looked at introducing scoring systems to simplify the output, reporting one figure in isolation rather than having to go searching in amongst all the data that isn't so relevant. This really was the very tip of the iceberg in terms of the functionality available for analysing your data within Snap. On screen now are a couple of QR codes which will take you off to some of our recent webinars, including the use of tables to display your data, and a more detailed filtering webinar that looks at how to isolate your different datasets. You can access these and a whole host of additional resources on our support hub. If you have got a spare 2 minutes, I'd be grateful if you'd complete our short survey about today's webinar. This can be accessed via the QR code on screen now, or you can find it in the chat area of this Teams call. You will receive an email in the next day or so, which will include all the links off to these resources, as well as the feedback form and a recording of today's session. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.